So, welcome all of you to the second plenary meeting of the National Coalition on the Education Emergency. Some of you will recall that we had the first meeting in July last year, and at that time we were trying to see if people can come together and discuss the education emergency and also see what is it that we can collectively do about it. So I won't go into the details of what all we have been able to do in the last 10 months or so. We have done quite a few things, but of course, it's, I would say, just a speck compared to what we really need to be doing. But there is hope, and we have been at it on different aspects, including the social mobilization, education support, and research to support both. And therefore, I won't go into the details of that. Today's plenary is really focusing primarily on where we are right now and what is it that we need to do. And the idea is really to get the objective really is to get everybody's ideas. So we have given maximum time for the open sessions, but we also thought it would be useful to have some element of some aspect of sharing by a couple of people who have been engaged with the education emergency in quite some detail over the last year and even more. And therefore, we have Professor Ramanujam, who will speak immediately after I finish, and he will focus, including on the experience in Tamil Nadu, on the academic and the pedagogic possibilities that he sees that the coalition needs to engage with. And after that, we'll have Sri Raju, who has been working and advocating on issues relating to Dalits for a long time, and he will bring in perspectives on how the education has affected the marginalized groups and what is it that we can do there. Immediately after that, very briefly, we have a set of slides which will talk about, in which Sajitha will talk about the real problem that the emergency is, some of the things we are aware of, and at the same time, there are some elements that we may not be completely aware of. So Sajitha will talk briefly about that. Then between 4 to 4:45, we'll have more analysis of what is happening and some suggestions. And after that, 4 to 4:45 for around 10 minutes or so, Sajitha will again talk about what is some initial ideas that we have going forward from this point in time. And again, we'll have open discussions after that. So I'll just stop now because I think we are eager to hear Professor Ramanujam. And Professor Ramanujam, Anusha, have you given the presenter access to him in case he wants to show some? Professor Ramanujam, would you like to show?
Yeah, I have given presenter access. You should be able to see a screen share option at the bottom.
Yeah, I'll do that. Just a moment.
Yeah. Welcome, Professor Ramanujam. Thank you so much. We're so happy you're here with us. Yeah, please go ahead, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thanks very much for the opportunity, Guru. Yeah, I will start with talking about some recent, in my interactions, a couple of questions that came up. So I thought talking about it would set the context. And this was, one was from a student and one from a teacher. This was in Tamil Nadu Science Forum, we had having discussions with children and teachers in context, and this was one with a group of class 9 children. And there was this child from Marikudi named Prakash, who said, I thought there would be, he didn't quite put it this way, I'm trying to paraphrase what he said, but he said, schools had reopened, and so he was asking, I thought there would be lessons on lockdown for next time. And then he asked us, will you teach us? Okay, he was basically asking the Science Forum group. When we had further discussion, we found that his entire family had lost their means of livelihood during 2020-21 and have been struggling to re-establish themselves. And here was a child who was asking from that perspective. He was asking, I suppose, he didn't quite articulate it in this fashion, right? But what he was asking was, we went through all this and we have come back from school. Why are you not telling us what to do, right? This is one. Another one was in a very different context. This was with elementary school teachers, and this was more recent. And this is a teacher, Mary Shalini from Madurai, and she asked, how is it that what I haven't been able to do with 18 years of experience, we expect online videos and Byju's to do easily? Now, even this articulation is problematic, but you can see that she's assuming that what all the edtech companies are doing, whatever they are probably doing easily, which is itself a very questionable thing. But she's talking about this sudden thing with videos, videos in classrooms, smart classrooms. There's a lot of all that talk going on, and she was reacting to that. And she was mixing it up with what Byju's is doing because she's seeing it in advertisements, all that. Now, I wanted to mention this because now these questions brought to my mind that basically, as a society, as a nation, we have not even grasped the magnitude of today's educational crisis. What children are going through, what teachers are going through, and the sense of bewilderment. I mean, it's not only about school closing. In Tamil Nadu, schools have reopened and have been going on for some time. There have been, within quotes, return to normalcy, exams, now vacation is on, schools are going to reopen on June 3rd. Now, I think the sense of bewilderment that I see, I think is what I want to focus on essentially. Now, in terms of challenges, there are many challenges that the pandemic has highlighted. And I don't have to talk about it in this group, but since Guru said, it's about setting context, so I thought, one is nutrition laws. Nutrition laws in all age groups due to deprivation and loss of livelihood and long-term projections for these. Now, this is one thing that we have had many discussions about is the fact that across the country, the noon meal scheme shut down for quite a length of time, and then even when it actually resumed, it was dry rations provided for a very long time, and you know what that actually means in terms of nutrition for many, access to many children. And this also coincided with the time when large numbers of people lost livelihoods, and so there were families that were utterly uh, reduced to eating very little, and in fact, there are large number of families with such whose only access was the dry rations that the government was provided for school. So, and what this means in terms of long-term impact is something that we are beginning to grasp only now, and this is something that is a huge challenge. And the other one that we have seen again and again is the inability of the system to get localized data and take decisions. And Tamil Nadu, during the pandemic, actually, after the initial few months, I think the public health system swung into action quite seriously. And in fact, by November 2020, September onwards, in fact, and there were red districts and green districts and amber districts. So there were they were actually going about it in a differentiated fashion with public health strategies for different sections, urban areas, rural areas. But on the other hand, when it came to school, it was all or nothing. It was, the whole state, things were shut down, the whole state, things were opened, and again, during Delta, everything was shut down, and again, in between, there was nothing, it was shut down, and then again during Omicron, everything was shut down. There was no, there was localized data available, but as far as the education system was concerned, it was statewide action or nothing. And now what we have seen, even when we resume, all the efforts, initiatives that are taken, invariably, it's again statewide action or nothing. So this is something that we see very clearly in the system, and it's deeply problematic, and it has, the pandemic has highlighted how this thing works. And the society's exclusive focus on board examinations and entrance examinations. We saw that during the pandemic, that there was this big mess with when the exams board exams would take place or not, and how it would be calculated, what is the formula, newspapers carrying it on front page. And all that time, whether classes were actually happening for 1 to 9, nobody cared, or whether online classes happening at the university level, whether they were effective. So nobody was talking about any of these, but media, everything was highlighting board examinations. So clearly, the fact that the entire system is about certification, and it is about this came to light dramatically during the pandemic, and I think this is another thing that. And then the big surge in the pedagogy market, the what we have seen in the opening up of this pedagogy market in a huge way, and the direct access that education and technology companies have to decision makers across states, in Delhi, everywhere, and what they were able to do, and what how they are entering in a very big way. And this is one situation again in Tamil Nadu. We have seen this in the last 2 years. The narrative has changed quite dramatically. It's not that there was no initiative of this kind earlier at all, but I think the terms of debate have changed, and there was this TINA that the country came up with in the 90s. There is no alternative. That was to LPG, liberalization, privatization, globalization, and so on. And today the TINA is being applied to online education, digital, what digital technology in the classroom, with NEP talking about it, and especially in terms of using technology for tracking children, tracking teachers, for collecting data from classrooms. This is a very big this thing. And then, edtech companies offering quick sachet-like solutions to various pedagogic problems. These are things that we can see, and now many more. I mean, in whatever 15 minutes, what I thought was to highlight a few of these central things. And now I think we'll have more to say, and I think in terms of the people gathered here, probably there is more experience than any other group in the country on addressing and acknowledging these challenges. And in terms of issues, priorities, now given the magnitude of the crisis, how do we prioritize our efforts as a society, as the National Coalition on this education emergency? Now, and here I would like to talk a little bit about the Tamil Nadu experience, is this mobilization of community support for schools. Now, in August 2021, it started off as a discussion with the Tamil Nadu government and several groups. Science Forum was involved. There was this thing that, okay, schools are going to reopen, and there is going to be a crisis at hand. And as far as especially primary schools, elementary schools are concerned, the school teachers would not be able to cope with the dimension of the challenge and the kind of attention needed, and you need community support for that. And this, it was various formulations were talked about, and I think it moved into different spheres. But finally, this Ilam Thedi Kalvi, there was this program called Ilam Thedi Kalvi that was formulated, and it has been going on for the last several months for more than 6 months now, in selected districts, but actually for about 4.5 months in almost all of Tamil Nadu. This is a mobilization of about 1.5 lakh volunteers. So there are 1.5 lakh community centers going on. These in villages where 1 or 2 volunteers handling about 20 children or 30 children in some cases. I believe the number is much larger in some and smaller in some. And the children vary in age group, but it's basically a community support center. And some units or modules as SCRT prepared the material with support of teachers. And this, it's a bunch of activities and some supplementary educational material that's provided. But I think from what we hear on the field, it's largely run by the enthusiasm of the volunteers. And but it is proved to be something that in across the state, a kind of an acknowledgement from society, an acknowledgement and a recognition that in this situation, primary education is important and that the community should act. I think now the need for it is to be articulated in a wide way, because across the country we do not see such initiatives. And if such support is to be mobilized, what is the form it should take, what is the content of it? Now, Tamil Nadu is talking about, they have already extended it till October, and there is talk that it will go on till December of this year. Now, and then what will happen afterwards, we don't know. But the fact that one concerted effort for a whole calendar year of this kind from community level is having some effect. It's not going uniformly well. I mean, we get a lot of mixed reports, but the fact is that something like that is taking place. Another one that I want to talk about is understanding, like the examples that I was giving of a child talking about having some expectations, something like, you have this huge disruption for a year and a half, 2 years, and then you come back to school from class 7 to class 9, and then you expect something to be changed in school. And then that boy, that's what he was asking. You don't even acknowledge lockdown. There are no lessons about lockdown. There is no lessons about, what happened to your family and what you should be doing if there is another one next time, right? Now, we or this teacher seeing that suddenly, this is a teacher from a private school, pretty good school, a highly reputed one at that, and she has been doing this online education on this time, and then she sees some videos being promoted, and she has actually seen some of them. She's participated in some of the effort that SCRT is doing right now, and she was telling me what is it that that these videos are going to do that I have not been able to do with 18 years of my teaching, right? And somehow she thinks that Byju's is actually doing better, and the complete confusion about what all that means, how this new classrooms are going to come, and but I think we have really not understood. We've talked a lot about learning loss. We have speculated on many of the problems that are there, but to an articulation, clear articulation on the impact of deprivation of schooling and what it means for students and teachers, I believe we have not understood the depth of the problem. And I would like to see. I mean, I have seen studies that give numbers on various things about how, what schools were doing, where it was closed, and what learning loss in some sense in terms of achievement. But after children have come back, after teachers have come back, I have not seen any in-depth study of what is actually being faced by the teachers in schools in the classroom. And then what I would say is a large-scale detoxification. We've had a situation in this country where millions of children, literally, for about a year and a half, nearly 2 years, being glued to devices, digital devices for long times, and the kind of toxicity that lives in the system, and what it means for children in terms of their emotional and intellectual well-being. I think I don't think we have even understood, but more importantly, what do we do about it now? This is something that we hear from teachers in all the state. So, yeah. And then right digitalization, this is a term that I have really learned from this group. Building strength in the system to respond constructively to the EdTech surge, to articulate how it should be done and how it should not be done, and what is the way we should move forward. And this is particularly important in the context of the NEP 2020 and the big push that we see coming from Delhi. And lastly, the tremendous curricular and pedagogic opportunity that has come up. In Tamil Nadu, there is this Enumeratum scheme which is trying to articulate over the next 3 years to develop foundational skills, as they call it, basically ensure that all children achieve certain levels of education in primary school. And but it's a fairly open one. It talks about how you move from text-based to children's level-based content, and move to alternative pedagogy, assessment only through observation, etc., etc. We'll see how it goes. But the point is that definitely there is a curricular and pedagogic opportunity that has come up, and if whether we can take hold of it and use it as a drive is something that we need to think about. Yeah, so I just wanted to highlight a few issues, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Ramanujam, for that. We'll have discussions on what you spoke about later, but I'll now welcome Sri Raju to present. And Anusha, will you open the slides?
Thank you. I would like to compliment the National Coalition on Education Emergency for bringing out these most important issues concerning education at this point of time, because not much is talked about in the country. Though it is a real emergency, it is pity that the kind of seriousness, the kind of urgency, the needed focus is not there in the public domain in the country. So it is in this background, your initiative is very valuable. I guess today the country ought to be declaring education emergency, but unfortunately the country seems to have declared archaeology emergency, getting the mosques dug or temples dug to find out something. So that is where we are, and we need to really come together more in number to bring out these issues. In the next 10 minutes, I just would like to highlight some of the issues concerning the marginalized sections, particularly the Dalits in the context of education. Ramanujam ji has already brought out very clearly as how even in Tamil Nadu, which can really boast of a very good educational system in place, they were not really looking at the localized data, localized situation. So there is a one solution for the entire country. In that kind of a scenario, you can understand how Dalits will be facing severe marginalization in the context of education. That is what I would be highlighting. I will not go into many details. I'll be just pointing out certain thoughts for you to consider. Next. Next. Yeah. The outline of my presentation would be, I would be briefly talking about the reality of the marginalized sections, particularly the Dalits in the context of education, because if you want to understand Dalits and education, you will not be able to understand unless you grasp, acknowledge the reality of Dalits in the society. If you ignore that and try to look at the education of Dalits, you will miss the real picture. So we need to understand what is the reality of Dalits. Secondly, I would be talking about what are the particular issues of concern for Dalits and the way forward. Next. Coming to the Dalit reality, I would say, when I say Dalit reality, I would like to bring out Dalit truth as opposed to the lies of the caste system. Because Dalit reality is literally in every sphere of life of Dalit. There is a battle between this truth against the lies of the caste system. Whether it is politics, whether it is education, whether it is economic development, in every facet of life of Dalit, you would find that there is a conflict between the truth and the lies of the caste system. That is what one has to recognize and understand. And I would like to point out that in the context of education, I have seen very clearly, not only now, for so many last a few decades, right from the time when I entered the civil service in early 1980s, I've seen very clearly that there is exclusion hiding behind the pretense of inclusion. There is the caste system's DNA is evident in education system. And thirdly, the Dalit reality is, you would agree with me that during the freedom struggle, most of the Dalit struggle led by Baba Sahib Ambedkar has been to secure political representation for Dalits. But unfortunately today, the political representation secured for Dalits in assemblies and parliaments has not really helped in leveraging cause for better quality of education for Dalits. So these are the three realities I would like to focus. One is there is an exclusion hiding behind the pretense of inclusion. The caste system's DNA is evident in education system, and the hard-fought political representation has not really made much difference to the quality of education to the Dalits. Next. Now, there is, I think we need to recognize that if you look at the education system in India, you would typically find all features of the caste system in the education system. You find elite private schools giving quality education to a few sections of the community who are capable of paying high fees, and you have government schools largely populated by the poor and the marginalized sections where the quality of education is very poor. So that is typical of a caste system providing for graded inequalities. And the government schools have low quality teaching, and you find since independence there is a degradation of free public education. On one side, there is a promise of free education, but the free education, there is a significant degradation of the free education. Next. Another facet of caste system's DNA in the education system is the teaching staff and the education officers, their social attitudes, community prejudices, they very significantly impact the narrative that happens in the classroom, the kind of confidence that you are giving to the children, the kind of value you are giving to the child. All these things are at play in the classrooms. Then in the textbooks, you find there is invisibility, stereotyping, and avoidance of mention of discrimination. And you also find in the lessons across the country, the caste bias in the lessons is evident. A number of studies have very clearly brought out. Next. There are also instances of violence, children put to abuse, then discrimination and segregation. These are evident across the country in the schools and the colleges and in the university also. Rohit Vemula's incident clearly brought out as how even in the universities there is a palpable instance of discrimination Dalit children are suffering. Next. Now coming to the political representation, the political representations the Dalits have secured through hard battle. The studies have shown that it has not really made much difference to secure quality education to the Dalits. For example, at a village level, you would not find the elected representatives at the village level espousing the cause of education for the Dalits. In fact, during my visits to the villages, I found when I sit in the Grama Sabhas attended by all communities, there is hardly any mention on issues concerning Dalits education. Grama Sabha after Grama Sabha, I find these issues don't come up. But when I go to the SC locality or tribal habitations, then I find there are a lot of issues. The parents are coming up with issues concerning the education. Why is this happening? That is happening because somewhere at the psyche of the society, the access to education is not something that needs to be taken note. Access to education for Dalits is not something that needs to be taken note and spoken about. Why? Because that is something, I would say, a feature of the caste system. The caste system thrives on keeping certain sections of the people away from the education. And that's why there is a general psyche in the society that when the society as a whole is together, that there is no that kind of a eagerness to talk about access to education, quality education to Dalits. When you go to the Dalits in their habitations, you would find that they have a lot of issues to talk about, but they don't open their mouths when they are sitting with others. Similarly, that is what is happening in the assemblies. In how many assemblies and parliament debates one has found a qualitative discussion, debate on the Dalit education, on the inequities that are there, on the inequities that are widening in the access to education, the access to quality education. And during the last 2 years also, Dalits particularly suffered during the COVID. For 2 years, most of the Dalit children could not access education because they don't have access to online education. And added to that, their families faced hunger, starvation, the loss of employment, loss of livelihoods. So a double whammy the Dalit children were subjected to. But I have not seen any debate in any state's assembly or parliament on these issues. So the elected representatives, particularly the SC, ST MLAs or MPs, I would say they have failed to bring out these issues. That is where I said that they have failed to leverage this political representation for SC, STs to further the cause of the Dalits. Similarly, in the legislative committees, there are a number of legislative committees in operation. I don't find any legislative committee in any state or at the parliament level particularly looking at these issues closely to bring out what needs to be done for the nation as a whole. Next, please. Then some of the issues that I would like to highlight very briefly. One Harvard professor, Land Pritchett, has observed that there is no education system in India. It is only a selection process where small percentage benefit, but vast majority get wasted. If you look at GE exams, NEET exam, lakhs of people, lakhs of students appear for these exams. Only a few of them get elected based on their rote memory and their ability to answer the questions fast. The students' understanding of the concepts are hardly put to test. So it is what is happening today is a large number of people are in the school system, but there is a kind of a selection process which filters some of them to employable positions. And to get into that selection, the corporate houses have opened up coaching centers across the country, mushrooming off these coaching centers for preparing the students. They are like factories from morning to night, preparing the students to crack these examinations. And it is only the rich, only those who can afford are able to put their children in these coaching centers. So consequently, you find only those who have economic power are able to get into these kind of opportunities and get meaningfully employed. All others are, I'm afraid, are getting settled down in a very low-end service jobs. Next. I think by now the country ought to have recognized that, considering the industrial revolution with 4.0, with machine learning, artificial learning, English is something that definitely gives access to employment for the children. But unfortunately, the National Education Policy 2020 discourages imparting education to Dalit children and talks of providing English medium education only from 5th class or preferably from 8th class. But I would say that from the 3rd class onwards, across the country, there should be universal access to English medium education for Dalit children. In fact, one state has taken this bold step. State of Andhra Pradesh has taken this bold step. They have announced a policy for providing universal access to English medium education for all the children from the 3rd class onwards. Otherwise, what is happening is those who can afford are going to private schools, accessing English medium education. Dalit children, marginalized children from the marginalized sections, they are in the public schools and they are not able to have English medium education, and they are deprived to access employment opportunities in the market. Next. Now coming to the way forward, a few thoughts I thought I'll share with you. There is one very successful model that has worked for many years in the state of Telangana, social welfare residential schools, where large number of residential schools, government have invested in these residential schools, provided very high quality infrastructure, invested on recruiting experienced teachers, invested on their training, and provided totally different approach to education for SC/ST children in these residential schools. Consequently, most of these children, they performed so well that many of them were able to enter into IITs, IIMs, get into medical colleges, get into many other professional schools. They were able to do much better than other students of other communities in the state. This has happened because of the whole approach to education was changed. There was emphasis on preparing the community, emphasis on preparing the teachers, sensitizing the teachers, and investing on building the self-confidence of the students. All these elements have come together in the social welfare residential schools initiative, and consequently we have thousands of children coming out of these schools very successfully. So when it has worked at one state, it may be possible for the nation as a whole to replicate some of these best practices across the country. Then there is a imperative need. It is imperative for increasing spending on the education. Right now, only 2% of GDP is going for education. It has to go up. We have to invest more on infrastructure, invest more on teacher training, and as I've said earlier, particularly from the context of Dalits, their ability to have quality education, their ability to have expand their employment opportunities, giving them access to English medium, investing on teachers to provide quality English medium education is something that we need to really plan for. Next. And there is a case for moving away from schooling for all to learning for all. there are best practices coming from Vietnam and Estonia, where they have focused on learning for all. And in these countries, the bottommost 10% in the economic ladder, the children of these communities are able to fare they're able to do as well as the children of the top 10% in the Europe or America. So this has happened because these two countries have focused on learning for all. Right now, we are only focusing on schooling for all. We are looking at gross enrollment rates, things like that. But we have to shift on learning for all. And investment on quality pre-primary education, particularly from the perspective of marginalized sections, investing on quality pre-primary education is something that is going to give them long-term dividends to get them qualitative transition to the school education. So focusing on pre-primary education is very much in the interest of marginalized sections. And today we don't have learning outcomes measurement at all levels. We don't have the measurement of these learning outcomes at all levels, particularly community-wise. So we need to put in place a system where we'll be able to know where we stand so that we can put in some efforts in those areas where we are not doing well. Next. Most of the teachers in the schools, they need a lot of sensitization on how to really deal with the issues of the caste discrimination, marginalization, and work in an environment in such a way that the Dalit children feel that their dignity is respected and their self-worth is valued. So a lot of sensitization to the teachers is needed. There is a case for promoting partnership with NGOs. In fact, I can recollect many years back as how in the state of Andhra Pradesh, a meaningful partnership the government had with the MB Foundation has helped the state to achieve near abolition of child labor in the villages. So that kind of a partnerships need to be promoted, particularly in the present context. Today, when I see in the villages, I'm reminded of the situation which I have seen in the early 80s, 90s, where children used to be in the work, they used to be out of work. Same situation has come back again after the COVID. After 2 years of gap, many children are going back to the work. So there is a great deal of effort that is needed to again get them back into school. That is where a lot of effort to work closely with the NGOs is needed. And finally, this aspect of skill building post the schooling. What is happening is many Dalit children, they drop out even at the high school level and then end up with a very low paying jobs. So instead, if we are able to have meaningful skilling post school, they will be able to have access to employable skills and get employed in a meaningful way. So that kind of a focus is needed. So what I've done is I've broadly highlighted the basic features of Dalit situation, the concerns that we have as far as Dalit education is concerned, and a few suggestions on the way forward. And finally, I would like to reiterate that today what we are facing is a real emergency, and particularly for marginalized sections, it is something I would say a matter of grave concern that the policymakers have to really look at very closely and come up with the policies and programs so that a generation of these students are not really left behind. So these are the thoughts I thought I'll share with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Raju, for your thoughts. I have no.
Professor Ramanujam and Raju sir explained a lot about the specifics. But I'll be going over some of those things. Can we just go to the next slide?
Yeah, audio is not clear, Sajitha. Just maybe can you try the laptop only and not the phone? Maybe put the phone away and just speak on your laptop. Sorry. Your laptop.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's okay. But put the other device off, yeah.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think this slide is self-explanatory. We'll wait for Sajitha to join us back, but this slide is really talking about the fact of the emergency not being restricted only to the education aspect, but the livelihood and the health aspects, which also impact education. Professor Ramanujam also mentioned it in terms of the dry rations and the non-functioning of the midday meals for most of the 2 years that the schools were closed, and that has had a significant impact in terms of the nutrition or the malnutrition levels of children. Yeah, so can we go to, so this is a very self-explanatory slide, and it's of course based on several research studies that have been done across the country. Anusha, can you go ahead? Yeah, so already I think Raju also mentioned the emergency has hit everybody, but not everybody in the same way. Next slide, please.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so I will just say here that we know from the data we have collected that the lower primary schools in India were shut for over 100 weeks. There were some variations across states, but overall, they across for over 100 weeks. Just to put it in context, the global average was weeks up to January 2022. Even in Latin America, with the most number of closures, the average was 37 weeks. So it's an unprecedented situation that we have, 260 million children who've been without schools for about 100 weeks. Next slide, please. And we know that even before the pandemic, the literacy levels, even basic literacy levels, were really very low. So this is from the ASER, 2018. The percentage of children in Standard 3 who could not read a word, according to their survey of rural children. And we don't have to go into the details of state ranking and so on. But essentially, you see that there are several states, over 30% of the children could not read a word in Standard 3. There's some that are, better, you could say, because the proportion is less than 20%. Now imagine these children coming into grade 5, which is what happened. And I think the kind of situation that Professor Ramanujam was saying is perfectly understandable, but on a scale that is running into tens of millions. Slide, please. Oh, I've lost the connection again. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear.
Yeah. Okay.
Bit patchy, but we can.
More than during the pandemic, more than 40% of students in government schools had no learning activity. And as Mr. Raju said, a lot of these will be the Dalits, the minorities, the people who, the tribal communities and so on, the urban poor. More than 40 had absolutely no learning activity, which includes things just like watching television or listening to the radio. That is the situation that has happened for 2 years. Next slide. And here we're together, the next slide, please. Just like which of the states, just comparing these two, the reading levels of 2018 and those states that had, no learning activity. If you just kind of correlate this, you do see that the two are related. In fact, those states that have low learning levels in terms of reading also have no learning activity. And you see this group at the top, Bihar, Jharkhand, Rajasthan, ARS, Arunachal Pradesh, and the one circle at the bottom, these are children who had very limited learning before and who had absolutely no learning activity during these 2 years. Next slide, please. So this slide is from our own survey because there are very few that show the differences between higher socioeconomic status and lower socioeconomic status. In this survey in Telangana, we were able to capture that the big differences between those who are just somewhat better off, and as Raju sir said, our system is so stratified. And we're not talking about the very elite sections, but just those who have parents in the organized sector, who have some knowledge of English, and who are not SC, SC, or OBC. The difference here that many more were able to follow classes online, they're enrolled in private schools, they're in tuition, etc. And the most important thing is they even think that their situation better during the pandemic. 50% of them had positive comments. Only 9% had negative comments, had positive comments among the poorer sections. So we have, next slide, please. We worked out a set of guidelines on called the future at stake. It was sent to every state government and so on. We outlined 8 steps. I won't say there was much of a response from the state governments at least. And could you move to the next slide, please? And skip the next 2 slides and just go to the one on the education finance. If you can show that on the please. No, we need to go to the one on the education finance. Could you go back?
Yeah, back.
Oh, I think something has got missed.
Yeah, maybe a slide got missed.
Yeah. Anyway, I mean, when you see this, if you see the graph, you will see that government education expenditure as a share of GDP fell in 2022-23. So this is how we are responding to the crisis, that the education expenditure has actually fallen. So finally, I'd just like to conclude by saying that the response has been really denial of the scale of the education emergency, an elite consensus that school reopening and business as usual is just sufficient. What you need is some minor kind of and so on. There's a complete failure of the political parties to take up the education emergency. And the next slide, please. And an inability of the people to articulate the difference to education and a diversion of attention from the education emergency. So I don't mean to end on a pessimistic note, but the main thing I wish to say is that we really have to continue with this effort because there is an effort to almost brush it under the carpet. So thank you very much, and sorry for all the interruptions.